The moment most senior travelers walk up to security this year, they run into a rule that didn't even exist 12 months ago, and nobody warns them first. B-roll. An older woman alone at a check-in kiosk, glancing at her watch. Margaret is 68. She's flying alone for the first time since her husband passed, on her way to meet her first grandchild. She did everything right, arrived early, packed light, printed her boarding pass the night before, and she still got pulled out of line, a new 2026 identification rule she'd never heard of. Her hands started shaking. She thought she was going to miss her connection. Close-up TSA checkpoint sign, hands passing an ID across the counter. What saved her in the end took 90 seconds, but only because a stranger in line leaned over and whispered it to her first. That's the problem. What you know or don't know in the first few minutes at the airport this year determines whether your trip starts calm or chaotic. And here's what TSA and the airlines will never sit you down and explain themselves. None of what I'm about to share costs you a dime, and most of it takes less than a minute. After 60 years on this earth, you've earned the right to fly without feeling like you're guessing. So let's get into it, starting with thing number 10. Thing number 10, the new ID fee nobody warns you about. 055 300. B-roll TSA ID checkpoint, close up on a driver's license with a gold star. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I already dealt with real ID. I'm fine. I respect that. I do. But this thing changed again this year, and it's catching even prepared travelers off guard. Graphic. February 1st, 2026, confirm ID fee begins. Full real ID enforcement began back in May of 2025. No more grace periods, no more warnings. But as of February 1st, 2026, TSA added something new. If you show up without a real ID-compliant license or an accepted alternative like a passport, you now have to pay a $45 fee and verify your identity through a system called Confirm.ID before you can even get in line. That process alone can take 10 to 30 minutes. B-roll. Retired man rifling through his wallet, missing his gate. A 70-year-old retired postal worker I heard about flew twice a year, every year, on the same expired format license. He'd never had a problem. This time, he lost $45 and nearly an hour standing in a secondary line, watching his boarding group close out.
Here's your defense, and it costs nothing. Check the corner of your driver's license right now, tonight, for a small gold or black star. No star means you need a passport, a real ID, or another accepted document before your next flight. Not at the airport, before you leave the house. Your defense. Check for the star before you pack. 90 seconds, $0. Now, thing number 9 is a rule so new, most frequent flyers still haven't caught up to it. Thing #9, the rule that quietly disappeared 355. B-roll. Shoes going into a TSA bin, then footage of someone walking through with shoes on. I'll confess something. I used to be terrible about this one myself. I'd start unlacing my shoes on autopilot the second I hit the checkpoint line, out of pure habit. Graphic. July 2025 shoes off rule ended nationwide. In July of 2025, the Department of Homeland Security officially ended the 20-year-old shoes off requirement at every domestic TSA checkpoint in the country. You read that right, the rule that started after a single failed attempt back in 2001 is simply gone now for the vast majority of travelers. When was the last time you actually looked up whether a rule you've followed for decades still applied? A 74-year-old widow flying out of a mid-size regional airport spent nearly 5 extra minutes wrestling her shoes back on at the belt, only to have the officer tell her, kindly, she never needed to take them off in the first place. 5 minutes doesn't sound like much, until it's the 5 minutes standing between you and your gate closing. TSA officers can still ask individual travelers to remove shoes if something on the scanner flags, so don't argue if they ask. But you no longer need to volunteer.
Your defense, leave your shoes on unless an officer tells you otherwise. Let them ask, don't assume. Thing number 8 is one where following the old habit can now backfire on you. Thing number 8, The liquids rule that changed at some checkpoints, 505, 710. B-roll, 3D scanner image of a carry-on bag, quart bag of toiletries. Now, some of you have heard whispers that the liquids rule is basically gone this year. I respect the excitement, but this is one where getting it half right costs you. Graphic, 311 rule still applies, except at CT-equipped checkpoints.
TSA has been installing advanced CT scanners, the same three-dimensional imaging technology used in hospitals at major hub airports since 2023. And by 2026, most large hubs have them. At checkpoints where these scanners are fully operational, 11 specific liquid categories, including medications and certain medical necessities, are now exempt from the old 3.4-ounce limit. Everywhere else, the standard rule still applies exactly as it always has. A 66-year-old retired nurse packed a full-size bottle of prescription eye drops, assuming her airport's new scanners meant anything goes now. Wrong terminal, old-style X-ray lane, she watched a $40 bottle go straight into the trash. Your defense: assume the old 311 rule applies, unless you see a sign at your specific checkpoint saying otherwise. Never guess based on what a checkpoint had last year. Thing number 7 affects a growing share of our community directly, and it's one almost nobody asks about by name. Thing #7, the Mobility Aid Screening Update, 7/10/915. B-roll, a walker being screened separately at a checkpoint, wheelchair at a gate. If you use a cane, a walker, a scooter, or a wheelchair, this one is worth pausing the video for. Graphic: Air Carrier Access Act your screening rights. Under the Air Carrier Access Act, you have the right to request private screening for yourself and your mobility device. And to have that device treated with reasonable care, it should never be tossed, dragged, or handled roughly. Unverified: confirm any 2026 specific procedural updates to mobility aid screening beyond the standing ACAA baseline before recording. A 79-year-old man traveling with a folding walker told me he used to just stand there and let officers do whatever they wanted with it, assuming he had no say. He didn't realize he could ask questions or ask for a private area until his daughter told him. The magic phrase here is simple: I'd like private screening for myself and my device, please. Your defense: say that sentence before screening even starts. Every single time. It's a right, not a favor you're asking for. Thing number 6 is one that's tripped up even travelers who fly the same route every year. Thing #6, the boarding group shakeup. 9:15/11:20. B-roll, crowded gate area, boarding group screen changing. Now here's one that has nothing to do with security and everything to do with the gate. Graphic: boarding structures changed at several major airlines in 2026. Unverified: confirm current boarding group structure for the specific airlines named before recording. Several major U.S. airlines restructured their boarding groups and loyalty tier priority this year. If you haven't flown that airline since last year, the boarding number on your pass may not mean what it used to. Travelers who assumed their old status still applied have found themselves boarding much later than expected, with overhead bin space already gone. A 63-year-old retired school teacher, a loyal flyer on the same airline for 15 years, ended up in the very last boarding group on a recent trip and had to gate check a bag she needed in the cabin for her medication. Your defense: check your actual boarding group on the app the morning of your flight. Don't rely on memory from your last trip. Thing number 5 might be the one that saves you the most money without you doing a single extra thing. Thing #5, the Refund Airlines won't offer first 11/20/13/25. B-roll, canceled flight board, passenger on phone at a gate. I'll say this plainly because airlines will never say it this plainly to you. This is one of those things they will never volunteer. Graphic: automatic refund rule effective since late 2024 under a Department of Transportation rule that's been in force since October of 2024 if your flight is canceled or delayed more than 3 hours domestically. You are legally entitled to a full cash refund automatically in your original form of payment without asking. Before this rule, the default was a travel voucher unless you specifically demanded cash. Now the default is supposed to be cash, unless you choose otherwise in writing. A 72-year-old retired nurse had a domestic flight canceled and was quietly rebooked onto a flight the next morning. Nobody mentioned a refund. Weeks later, her daughter told her she'd been owed several $100s in cash the entire time. Your defense: if your flight is canceled or badly delayed and you don't want the rebooking, say the words, "I'm declining rebooking, I want my automatic cash refund," and get it in writing. Thing number 4 is a small rule with an outsized ability to ruin your morning. Thing #4, the carry-on crackdown, 1325-1530. B-roll, gate agent measuring a bag in a sizer, passenger gate checking a bag. Now I know what some of you are thinking. My bag has fit for 10 years. It'll fit this time. I respect the confidence. But gateside enforcement has tightened this year at several carriers, particularly on routes running full. In Verified, confirm specific 2026 enforcement changes and named airlines before recording. Bags that have technically always been slightly over the stated limit are now more likely to get pulled and sized at the gate, especially the soft-sided kind, that used to squish into the sizer with a little effort. A 69-year-old retired accountant, flying with the same rolling carry-on she'd used for a decade, got stopped at the gate on a packed flight and charged an unexpected $60 gate check fee. The bag that had always fit simply didn't fit that day. Your defense: measure your actual bag against your airline's actual current dimensions before you leave home, not from memory, from their website, this trip. Thing number 3 is a rule where doing it right takes 10 seconds and doing it wrong takes 10 minutes. Thing #3, the medication declaration rule, 1530-1735. B-roll, pill organizer, prescription bottles in a clear pouch at security. This one matters more the more medications you carry and after 60. That's most of us. Graphic, medications don't need to be in original bottles but declare them. TSA guidance allows medications, including liquid medications over the standard limit, to be carried in reasonable quantities beyond the usual restrictions, but only if you tell the officer before screening begins, not after something gets flagged. Unverified. Confirm any 2026 specific updates to medication declaration procedure before recording. A 71-year-old man carrying insulin and several prescription liquids said nothing at the checkpoint, assuming the bag would just pass through. It got flagged, pulled, and hand-searched, adding 15 stressful minutes he didn't have before a tight connection. The magic phrase: "I have medications and medical liquids to declare." Your defense: say that one sentence before you even put your bag on the belt. It moves you from suspicious to expected. Thing number 2 is a right almost nobody in our community actually uses, because almost nobody knows the correct words to ask for it. Thing #2, the assistance request almost nobody makes, 1735-1940. B-roll airport wheelchair attendant assisting a passenger, empty accessible cart. Here's a rhetorical question for you. When was the last time you asked an airline for help getting through the airport, instead of just quietly struggling through it yourself? Graphic. You can request wheelchair or cart assistance at any age, any ability level under the Air Carrier Access Act. You are entitled to request wheelchair or golf cart assistance through the airport at no charge. And you do not need a disability, a diagnosis, or a doctor's note to ask. You only need to say so. A 68-year-old man with 2 new knee replacements told me he never asked because he didn't think he qualified. He walked nearly a mile through a connecting terminal in pain when a 5-minute phone call before his trip would have had a cart waiting at his gate. The magic phrase, "I'd like to request wheelchair or cart assistance for my flight, please," said when you book or at check-in. Your defense: Ask before you need it, not after you're already exhausted at gate C40. And now, thing number one, the one airlines genuinely hope you never learn about. The one airlines hope you never learn Hashone your CRO, writes 1940-2240, wide shot. Empty gate area at dawn, slow push in, here it is. The single most powerful phrase in this entire video. I mean that. Graphic. Complaints resolution official required by federal law. Under Federal Regulation 14 CFR Part 382, part of the Air Carrier Access Act, every U.S. airline is legally required to have a complaints resolution official, or CRO, available by phone at every airport. At all times flights are operating. A CRO isn't a regular gate agent. They have the authority to make decisions on the spot about mobility equipment, denied accommodations, screening disputes, seating issues that a normal agent simply cannot make. And almost nobody asks for one, because almost nobody has ever heard the term. Barole. Older woman on the phone at a gate counter visibly relieved. Let me go back to Margaret, from the very beginning of this video. After her ID scare, she had a second problem. The airline had reassigned her aisle seat, the one she needed for her hip, to someone else, and the gate agent told her there was nothing to be done. Margaret remembered one sentence her sister had told her before the trip. I need to speak to the CRO, please. The gate agent's entire posture changed. 10 minutes later, Margaret had her aisle seat back, an apology, and a boarding pass in hand before her group was even called. That phrase, I need to speak to the CRO, please, is not a request, it's not a favor. It's a federal right sitting quietly behind the counter of every airline in this country, waiting for someone to ask for it by name. Say it calmly, say it clearly. I need to speak to the CRO, please. Write it down if you have to. That phrase is worth more than any travel app you'll ever download. B-roll, sunset over airport runway, plane taking off. I want to hear from you. Which of these 10 did you not know before watching this video? Drop the number in the comments. I read every single one, and your answers genuinely shape what I cover next. If this helped you, hit that like button. It takes 1 second. And it helps more travelers over 60 find this information before they need it. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more practical travel intelligence built specifically for our community, because flying after 60 should mean flying better, not harder. This video is general information, not medical, legal, or professional travel advice. Always confirm current requirements with TSA, your airline, and your healthcare provider before you fly. Safe travels. I'll see you in the next one.